We are told that there are thousands of examples in our museums of our anthropological history. Why do you disagree?
There may be thousands of fossils showcased in museums and other places, but everybody knows fossils are fickle. Bones will sing any song you want. It all depends on which worldview lenses you view the fossil evidence through. If you really want to disprove evolution, go inside the fossil's head and then look at the brain, look at the complex biochemical machinery inside there, where God's not just his fingerprints, but his hands are all over it.
Can you take us through a summary of what you've shown us?
So the whole story boils down to, was this human or not?
We've all seen it. It's in all the textbooks and the documentaries. The march of progress, where we see the ape progressing eventually to modern humans. But does the evidence really stack up for this evolutionary story? I'm here today with Dr. Peter Lyon. Now, Peter, you have a PhD in neuroscience and you've written extensively on human fossils and the alleged Ape-Man fossils. So, Peter, what actually is an Ape-Man?
Sure. Well, it's any sort of creature or animals that evolutionists believe is more closely related to humans than chimpanzees. So they believe that humans and chimpanzees had a common ancestor, 6 million or a bit more, a bit less years ago, and that the line or lineage leading to humans they call ape-men. And they don't really like using that term anymore. I'm not sure why, but they don't like using the term missing link either. We won't go into that. They used to call them hominids, because of some reclassification, they now use the term hominin. And that actually includes a modern human as well in that category.
So if I use the word ape-man, they'd correct me?
Some may, but it's not that fashionable anymore to use.
Okay.
I use the term ape-man, so I'm just saying they don't like it because they want to be sort of more politically correct. That's so. But it is what it is. They are supposedly ape-men.
All right. So I can remember even growing up, there seemed to be a view that the evidence for these missing links, these ape-men, it was overwhelming. We are told that there is just so much evidence. What do you say to that?
Some evolutionists, they kind of do sort of elephant hurling tactics where they make these outrageous claims and intimidate, even bombastic terms. Like, for example, Tim White, who's a well-known paleoanthropologist, a few years ago, I think back in 2006, he wrote, and I'll paraphrase because I won't be able to quote it exactly, that there are now tens of thousands of fossils in museums all around the world that show evidence of evolution. And so he goes on to say that the creation model fails because of this. And
tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Sounds very convincing.
Yeah. It sounds very convincing, and that's what they're relying that the public will buy into it. But it may not be so convincing when, firstly, a lot of them are just fossil fragments, sometimes of the same creature or human. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, if someone else can have a different interpretation of them, interpret it differently, using a different worldview lenses, as not that these creatures are not hominin or ape-men, Tim White calls them hominids, then that sort of nullifies the evidence. So let me just briefly discuss what we'll talk about more in details. Because when you critically examine a lot of these fossils, things sort of rapidly tend to fall apart. So, for instance, you have this lineage, they believe, they don't like to call things a lineage anymore. They believe it's a branching progress. But you still you have to have some creature evolving into this, which then evolves into that.
This is the story of evolution.
Yeah. So on the table here, I have a sort of this represents an Australopithecus afarensis cranium, I think AL 444-2. So It sort of belongs to, they classify it as Australopithecus afarensis. And this is what they call Homo habilis. Some classify it as Homo rudolfensis, but some they tend to be people who like to split things into many species. But it's broadly defined Homo habilis sensulatus, if you could call it Homo habilis sensulatus or whatever. But broadly defined Homo habilis, this is KNM-ER 1470 cranium from Kubifora, Kenya, and that's the sort of one of the biggest one of the fossils that have been used most to promote evolution. It's one of their icons.
Okay.
So that's Homo habilis. And then here is Homo erectus. So as creationists, I believe that's fully human descendant of Adam and Eve. And that's so it's a bit large. This is relatively small Homo erectus. This is also from Kenya. And basically, so what they would believe that an Australopithecine, like Australopithecus afarensis, evolved into Homo habilis or something similar, like this one here or something else, but it's a habilis, and then it evolved into erectus. That's the traditional story. Mm-hmm. And until they find something to replace this, they'll continue to use it. So that's what we were talking about. But with, for instance, the Australopithecines, even some evolutionists like Charles Oxnard believed that they were just an extinct apish primate group. They were differed from both African apes and humans when he analysed the Australopithecines sort of almost equally or even more. Mm-hmm. And these had nothing to do with human evolution.
I hope you're enjoying the interview so far. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so can we talk about maybe some of the evidence that he had or that they've had to say that about? Yeah, so we got, and these three featured on our March to Progress image, didn't they?
Yes, mm-hmm. Yes. So basically, in short, before I get onto that, so this involved into that, and as I'll talk about more later, this is more of a illusory species which should be put into this one. And so there's a big gap there. But let's talk a bit more about the Australopithecines. Mm-hmm. So they've only been found in Africa, and they date from about 4.2 to 1.6 million years ago, allegedly in their evolutionary timescale. Okay. So so these are only found in Africa, and if you look at that, there's nothing really human looking at. If you look at the skull, there's nothing really human about it. It's very apish. I tend not to call them apes because, like some evolutionists who have studied them, like Oxnard, didn't classify them as ape. They were kind of different from African apes as well as humans, and you can see that some of the skulls they're not like chimpanzees, and so I call them apish primates, extinct group of apish primates that don't exist today. They're quite unique. Okay. There's really only one issue that some people have with this, that evolutionists say they were upright walkers. They walk upright, and in some ways that if you look at their pelvis and the femur, the thigh bone in some of them, mm-hmm. it was kind of angled more inward, so that they likely walk better upright than existing chimps. Mm-hmm. But even today, there's other apes that walk better than chimps. Like actually, gibbons are the most proficient bipedal apes. They're the less apes. Okay. And they can run quite well too. If you've ever seen it run, they can run pretty fast. Mm. So walk upright. They have a better posture, their anatomical posture, also for upright walking than actually chimps have or any of the great apes. Mm. But they spend most of their times in the trees. So walking upright or whatever is good for actually living in the trees as well. Mm. So that basically you walk out in a branch upright, you can reach out for whatever fruit or to grab the overhead branch. So it has a purpose. And a lot of these Australopithecines seem to have been have a tree-dwelling lifestyle. Like if you look at the arms of Lucy, it was built like a champion chimpanzee, climber. It was so they were strong. They had a body for curved fingers, toes, long fingers. They were designed for an arboreal lifestyle. But if they left the trees, then they could likely walk upright too, but not like humans. I doubt that very much. And the issue, all existing apes can also walk upright. It's just a matter of the degree, So it's you have the terms obligate or habitual upright, meaning when they were on the ground, that's the only locomotion way that they walked, and you have also the term optional or facultative upright walking, which means that it was an option, but they had other ways of doing it. So existing apes are kind of optional. Although I don't know whether any creature spends a lot of times in trees where you can actually call them obligate or habitual walkers because they don't spend that much time walking on the ground. And in the alleged environment they lived in, it made sort of the predators around make the African savanna today look like a picnic. So if you weren't good at living in the trees, you probably wouldn't live very long. So it was sort of saber-toothed cats, all sorts of cats and wild animals. So
so we can see why having the ability to walk upright would just be helpful for them in general. They might not necessarily have done that the majority of the time, but does the evolution story bring Australopithecines into this because of that ability?
Yeah, it's because of that. But I doubt they were even obligate or habitual, because some of the anatomy, like if you look at say Lucy's sacrum, the thing that joins the two hip bones together, and you look at the top, the vertebra, the centrum, where the spine, the vertebral column, the lumbar region joins the sacrum. This is very small, which indicates that it couldn't take probably the loads of a fully upright walking lifestyle. So it couldn't have spent that much time on it because it probably get all sorts of back problems. And also some of them they had kind of the hip bones, the iliac blades sort of more flared sideways. So the muscles, the gluteal muscles, probably couldn't balance the body properly as they walked. So they wouldn't have walked in a human-like way. And other studies have shown that they wouldn't have walked that efficiently. So I don't know. It's a sort of semantics how much they walked upright, and it's really probably not that important. But for some people, they get too caught up in it.
Well, if they're trying to say that this is an ancestor of modern humans, would they then try and say that even with those abilities, at some point mutations, natural selection meant that ability improved? Is that the story?
Yeah, that's the thing. And one more thing on that, what they don't like to promote so much is that I've found sort of apes in Europe, like I think it's called Davinius Guggenmosi, or I don't know if I got the name right, I think from Bavaria, Germany. A baboon-sized ape dated about, in their timeline, 11.62 million years ago. So that's millions of years before Australopithecines lived, where there were no ape-men. So this was an ape-man. And the people who analysed that skeleton say that was a habitually upright walker. But mainly for the trees, it was a tree-dwelling ape, but it was habitually upright walking. It had the body designed for that. So even upright walking isn't a feature of ape-men. So by their own people who analysed it, upright walking, fully upright walking habitually wasn't a ape-man sign, because if you had apes already did that before they were ape-men, how could it be? It doesn't make sense. So basically, their evolutionist thing is that this thing here somehow evolved into this creature here called Homo habilis.
Okay, should we move on to this one now?
Yeah, that's...
Okay. What can you tell us about Homo habilis?
Well, it was birthed in controversy, and there's still controversy. So it was almost, I should say, a product of Louis Leakey's imagination. But let me tell you the background to it. In 1959, they found this in Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania. So they found this robust Australopithecine, not this particularly one. This is represent a female robust Australopithecine. This is actually from Cubiforia, Kenya, called KNM-ER 732. And basically, they believe it's a female robust Australopithecine, Australopithecus boisei. But they believe that, I'll put this aside, but they believe that they got a bigger one, a much bigger size one, I believe is a male version of it, of that same species. But they found that at Olduvai Gorge in a geological layer called Bed 1. And it was kind of nicknamed Nutcracker Man because it had such a big molar-teeth that I believe it cracked nuts.
Okay.
And it had this really big skull, and no one mistake it from human. But they found some tools called Olduvai tools in the sort of same layer. And what they did was they said, that hurts the maker of tools. They didn't call it Homo habilis. They call it actually Sinanthropus, and it became known as Paranthropus boisei, and some call it Australopithecus boisei. But what happened was a year later, that's when these finds, cranial elements that would later be called, 4 years later, would be called Homo habilis, which means handyman. And what was found was the type specimen was there was these two, when you put it together, there was these two parietal skull pieces, some relatively large, but they were incomplete. That was the only part of the brain case found. They also found the basically part of the lower jaw, okay? And they also found some hand bones that they attributed to this specimen. They found some other bones, but they attribute that to other specimens of the same species, and one in particular was a foot bone called the OH8 foot. So in 1964, what they did was they then named it as Homo habilis. And what they done is Philip Tobias, I think he was responsible for reconstruction estimate in the brain size. He said it had a brain size of roughly 680 cubic centimeters, and the brain size was the most important factor in determining this species because a lot of people were saying it's just another Australopithecine, variation of Australopithecus africanus.
Okay, so they're comparing brain size as in...
Yeah, the cranial capacity. When I say cranial capacity, it's correlated with brain size. But cranial capacity is a little bit more because it includes the fluid inside and the connective tissue as well. So but it's correlated with brain size. So sometimes I use them interchangeably.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're looking at the brain size of these as they find the bits of the bone that might be around the brain casing, etc., and then being able to work out what the brain capacity.
Yeah, but some of it is very crudely. But if you look at, if you go back and look at the model of the Homo habilis, this is a different Homo habilis, but a different specimen. It was called OH7, Olduvai hominid 7, and you could basically the way it was reconstructed, it left a lot of room for error and imagination. And he estimated its cranial capacity to be about 680, and some other guy, Holloway, who's sort of the guru of that, later said it was 687. But interesting is some Russian scientist, not that long after he unfortunately died, he was doing it as part of a PhD thesis, but she modelled it after a robust Australopithecine, so one of these things. And when it was done that, because a lot of the time when you estimate the cranial capacity, it depends on what you model it after if you don't have all the pieces. And she found that when you did that,
like a puzzle you're kind of putting together.
Because they were found in the same layer, the same geological layer, the same area. And he even said that the tools now, they no longer belong to the robust Australopithecine. They belong to his new species, Homo habilis. Okay. So there was no direct association with the stone tool. Interestingly, there was a Homo erectus specimen called OH9 of about cranial capacity of, I think, 1,067 cubic centimeters, found in a layer above it with plenty of tools around it. So likely the tool, which we regard as fully human, Homo erectus, so likely that all the tools belong to Homo erectus. Although even with some of the Olduvai tools, they can be actually produced by monkeys accidentally breaking stones. So they've been done papers on that. So sometimes you don't even know whether they have accidentally products or not, because monkeys can produce them just accidentally by smashing stones together.
And then it looks like the tools.
Yeah, it looks like some tools. So, but the more the hand axes and things like that, are definitely products of a human mind. Since then, evolutionists that have put specimen in there have called it a trash bag, garbage bag, or waste bag, because it's a motley assortment of specimens. Now,
motley assortment of specimens. What do you mean by that?
Very different sort of things. I've looked at the skull, and pretty much everything, the skulls in it, can be put into this species. Except the only one I've found is a specimen called SK847 from South Africa, which has a very, only mostly just known a part of the face, but its profile is very similar to this one. So that may be Homo erectus, but it's very incomplete. And so even some evolutionists have said that these specimens belong most of them belong with the Australopithecines, or a separate genus. They don't belong here. So getting back to the OH7, that's a tight specimen. So if that falls apart, the whole thing falls apart anyhow. But the jaw, which they found attributed to OH7, I think a few years ago, a group by Spohr et al. Analysed it, reconstructed it, and they said it was primitive, like Australopithecus afarensis, like actually more like the Lucy one, which has a kind of a long and narrow dental arcade in basically the jaw, the lower jaw. So it was afarensis, Australopithecine-like jaw. And the hand bones that are attributed to this OH7, some now believe it belonged to a robust Australopithecine. And same with the foot, which is a paratype, meaning another specimen, but of the same species, and used to to describe these species. Now a group by De Silva et al. Believe that belonged also to a robust Australopithecine. So all indications are that it likely was just in a robust Australopithecine, and when it was modeled like that, its brain size was like about the size of this one. So
it's almost sounding like we don't need this one.
Nah, and let me explain this one, because like I mentioned earlier, this is one of the skulls or crania that have been used most to promote evolution. So this is from Kubifora, KNM-ER 1417, discovered in 1972. It's had a variety of estimates of cranial capacities. Now, the traditional view is that a cranial capacity is 752 cubic centimeters, which is quite large for an Australopithecine. Incidentally,
this was in the 600s, wasn't it?
550.
Ah, okay, yeah.
But bear in mind, a gorilla has also been measured to have the same 752 cubic centimeters. So even if you inflate an ape, even to the human-sized brain, it doesn't make it human. It's still an ape.
What's a typical human-sized brain cranial capacity?
Well, it can vary from less than 700 to over 2,000, but the average is around 1345 cubic centimeters. But you have a lot of variability. For instance, I found there was a man called Daniel Lyon who works as a watchman at a Pennsylvania railway station, New York, some years ago. And after he had normal intelligence, was about 1.65 meters or something. They did a biopsy of his brain. He died in his 40s or something, and they were able to measure his brain weight, and you can determine then the cranial capacity, roughly work it out. So I worked it out that he had a cranial capacity, depending how you did it, of either 660 or 694 cubic centimeters. So that would be less than that. And he had normal intelligence. So he didn't turn in an ape because he was less than this one and less than the gorilla size. So
cranial capacity and intelligence don't necessarily.
Nah, and I think, and even evolution admit you can have a liter difference in brain size in modern humans, and it doesn't affect intelligence.
Okay.
So, for instance, Anatole France won a Nobel Peace Prize for literature in 100 or so years ago, and he had a sort of Homo erectus size, brain size around 11, or cranial capacity around 1100.
Okay.
And you have Leo Tolstoy. I think he had a brain size of around 2000 or so.
But does the evolutionary story try to tell us that cranial capacity intelligence was increasing?
Yeah, because they had no choice. There has to, otherwise, because it's brain size is metabolically very expensive. It makes up only 2% of the body weight, but it uses about 20% of the energy resource of the body, or something roughly like that. So if you increase the brain size, and it makes no difference to your intelligence, then it's a waste. But the problem is finding a correlation between it. If you actually I'll get back to this track in a minute, but if you actually did the sums, you could work out that over the period of the alleged evolutionary period, brain size per generation, sort of calculate out, it'll work out to a few million pinheads of brain tissue would have increased each generation over the last 6 million years or so.
Okay.
But the problem is if you can have a liter difference in brain size now, which is a lot more than a few pinheads, and that makes no difference, why would a few pinheads make a difference? Why would that have selective value? And that's even if you have a lot more centimeter cubes, milliliters. If a liter doesn't make any difference, what would a few centimeter cube milliliters do?
Doesn't seem to add up.
So it doesn't add up. So that's the problem. And it's special pleading. Why would it be different in the past if it doesn't have any consequences now? So that's the thing.
I hope you're enjoying this interview so far. Creating content like this takes a considerable amount of time, effort, and resources. We're passionate about getting this message out, and we want to keep bringing you more videos like this one. But here's the thing. We need your help to make this happen. Your support, no matter how big or small, will help us cover our production costs and enable us to continue creating impactful content. To support this project, just use the link in the description below or the on-screen prompt. We're so thankful for your support.
So I was talking about this one here. The cranial capacity, this one was measured at 752 cubic centimeters, but when it was actually reconstructed, it was reconstructed from hundreds of different pieces. And the late Alan Walker, who was involved in reconstructing it, he thought it was just a big brain Australopithecine, and that its face should swing out more like that way. So it's more like this one here, but a face should just swing out more like this way. This is a different reconstruction by bone clones, but so originally its face would have made it go very vertical, very flat vertical here, and that effect, the way you reconstructed the face can actually be made to especially the middle lower face can be made to go any direction you want, and so that you can use that to make the cranial capacity larger. Now, a group later by Timothy Bromwich looked at this thing, and they believed it had a more prognathic face, that is the mid-face, lower face projected forward more. So they modelled that, and they found that when they did that, the brain, instead of being 752 cubic centimetres, were now 625 cubic centimetres.
Why has it changed?
Because of the way you change the face, you change the structure inside will change, and it affects the capacity inside.
Yeah.
And although they said probably 700 cubic centimetres are right, I think for whatever reason. But even more recently, and it was actually demonstrated in Carl Werner's book on human evolution, and he interviewed a guy called Dr. Francis Thackeray from South Africa, who's an evolutionary paleoanthropologist. And he had a cast of a robust Australopithecine, one of these, although it was called, instead of Australopithecus boisei or Paranthropus boisei, it was Australopithecus robustus or Paranthropus robustus, because it's from South Africa. He had a cast of its skull, not like these where it's all filled in. He had a cast of the imprint of the inside of a skull of that, but he had a cast also of this one where this wasn't filled in. And he was able to if you had
compare?
it's called the endocast here of a robust Australopithecine, and he was able to, it was cut in half, but he was able to insert it into here, but the thing was that it made an almost perfect fit. But the thing was that the cranial capacity of that was only 530 cubic centimeters. So it's almost this size or even less. And he also examined what was the roof here, the dental arcade, where they overlapped was almost a perfect fit as well.
Okay.
And notice it has a wide sort of flattish face, which is sort of more typical of robust Australopithecines. But anyhow, so this seems to be not an ape-man. It was Australopithecines. You can argue about was it robust or what was it Africanus or was it something else? But it seems like it clearly belongs to Australopithecines. Now, there's no postcranial bones associated with this specimen here.
Post-cranial bones.
yeah.
When you talk about that,
I'm talking about the bones below the head.
Okay.
So now the only ones that are associated with, say, broadly defined Homo habilis, which would include this, tends to be a specimen known as OH62. Its limb proportions was actually more as ape-like or more ape-like than the limb bones of the Lucy specimen belonging to this species, Afarensis. So in a sense, you had the descendant was kind of, in limb proportions, more ape-like or as ape-like as its remote ancestor. So that didn't make a great evolutionary progression.
No.
And the reason they've attributed Homo habilis was because of its it has a few cranial fragments that could be associated with it. But it was mainly because it was associated with some of the cranial fragments. I think particularly the palate of this, the kind of the roof of the mouth here was associated with this skull from South Africa called STW53.
Is this another example of Homo habilis?
Some class of Homo habilis.
Okay.
This one was reconstructed by Ronald Clark, who actually found the Littlefoot skeleton. So he believes it's just an Australopithecine. But others have, like the guy, Philip Tobias, who was involved in measuring measuring the cranial capacity of the OH7 type specimen Homo habilis. He was involved in asking someone else to basically, as Carl Werner documents in his book, he believed this should be larger, and so he got someone to kind of move some of the pieces of the fossil apart. You can see the white bits is with imagination to make it. So you can make it.
That. So these coloured bits.
That's the actual fossils found, and the white bits are imagination. And so basically, it was made a bit larger. Although this one apparently is about 480 cubic centimeters or less, but the other one was made, according to Werner, about 50% larger. So then it could be called an ape-man, Homo habilis. So that's how sort of these ape. But Ronald Clark believes it's Australopithecine or Africanus or Australopithecine. But it illustrates the point that a lot of these specimens are. But the thing is, OH62, the limb bones were associated with this specimen, which is really Australopithecine anyhow. And that thing illustrates again the problem of inflationary brain sizes for Homo habilis. And there's others I can mention as well that have the similar problem with it, like this one here.
What's this one?
This is called OH24, also nicknamed Twiggy. And you can see again, there's room for a lot of imagination. And so its cranial capacity was measured at about said to be 590. But someone compared its kind of brain case or cranial wall with, which is the roof and the walls or the calvarium, the sides and the roof of the brain case, with another specimen called STW505, which had a brain size of 515 cubic centimeters. And this one was found to be smaller than that, yet it seemed to have a larger cranial capacity. So again, it doesn't add up.
There's no correlation there.
And and sort of the I think I'm not sure, but I think Tobias was involved in this one as well. So again, you have sort of these likely inflated brain sizes associated with this.
Because they're trying to say that they've come from this and they're going to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because if you don't have this, then you really have nothing. There's no.
Well, I was going to ask you, Peter, so what happens if, because everything you're telling me, it does seem like we don't need this. What happens if we take this out?
Well, then we get to this specimen here. That's just Homo erectus. So but if you leave this in, it's all imaginary. It's an imaginary species, and it's actually the skeleton below the neck was as ape-like as these anyhow. So it doesn't solve much. But these really should be even. Evolutionists like Bernard Wood, who's one of the doyens in evolutionary paleoanthropology, has said concerning Homo habilis, he believes they were hominins or ape-men, but they shouldn't be in genus Homo because, and he believes that firstly that they should go to the Australopithecines, or later he's saying they should be in a separate genus altogether.
Okay.
So it's not just creationists saying it.
Yeah.
But if you take this one out, so we put this one away somewhere. So again, you now have a big gap because the skeleton like Lucy is, although it has some like the pelvis superficially, it looks more human-like, but it didn't walk like a human in any way. So the whole story boils down to what was this human or not? And I certainly believe these were human. And
Homo erectus.
Homo erectus, yeah. So this one was 848 cubic centimetres, a little bit so lower end. But the interesting thing with Homo erectus is it's a species cranially defined species. But often what in a small brain have a species, but often what they do is a sort of circular reasoning. They say so let's call them robust because they have thick cranial walls and brow ridges, although this one are probably less robust than some of them.
But more so than Australopithecines.
Well, it's sort of in a different way. You can see here these have really strong post-orbital constriction here that behind the face, the skull, the brain case really narrows in, and the face is really large. And if you look here, huge chewing teeth. Mine would just be a small fraction of that. And it's sort of the dental arcade is not parabolic like in humans. So there's a lot of differences. You can see the dished-like face here and things like that. So it's sort of it's kind of a different sort of structure. There's no this one I picked this. I could have picked other ones. But this is sort of the smaller one, so basically, but it's sort of has you can see it's more like the occipital region of Homo erectus is sort of more angular than in humans. Modern humans is more rounder. It's more globular brain case in humans, so it goes more up like this. Although there's a little bit globular as this one as well. And a lot of humans don't have pronounced brow ridges. Most don't. Although sometimes you see people, you can notice some people with brow ridges today too, strong brow ridges. And humans tend to have a more, and this one is, its face is not actually that projecting. The face tend to be tucked in underneath the brain case, not projecting forward. Some of the erectus ones or the project forward. And it's also, when I say erectus, there's one, for instance, I call Homo heidelbergensis. So Homo heidelbergensis, broadly defined, sort of includes a lot of specimens that they would call the middle Pleistocene hominids or the muddle in the middle. So these are just larger skulls, but they look kind of like erectus. They have a larger cranial capacity, sort of, around much more human, much more closer around the human average.
So there's variation within
a lot
Homo
of
erectus.
variation. But what I was getting back to originally was that how they define Homo erectus from, say, heidelbergensis is basically the brain size. But it's interesting because I say if if it has a small brain size, these sort of robust skulls, I call them robust humans, will be classified as Homo erectus. Now, it may depend on other things too, because sometimes they're not consistent, because it depends on, there's a trade-off between morphology, the date, and kind of the date given, and things like that determine where they're found. So there's a lot of
if they've got dates for those areas where they're found, and they've decided
an expectation locality in a region.
Okay.
So something turns up in a locality where something else like that hasn't been found, then it may. But so now if a large specimen, and there are large specimens that are found, and I'll give an example, then they'll say, no, the brain's too large for Homo erectus. We'll call it Heidelbergensis or archaic Homo sapiens.
Okay, but there's been so much variation you've already shown us, even in the cranial capacity and brain size.
Yeah, it's circular reasoning, because they're saying because we're saying that Homo erectus, they use small brain to say that. They say that if it has a small brain, it's Homo erectus. If it has a large brain, it's not Homo erectus. And then they use that fact to say there are no Homo erectus. That's proof there are no Homo erectus with large brain size. So it's circular reasoning. So I'll give you one. There's probably several, but one of the extreme ones is the Sujiang 1 cranium from China, sort of, dated, 100 or 200,000 years old by evolutionary dating methods, supposedly 1 to 200,000 years ago.
Okay.
It had a cranial capacity about 1,800 cubic centimeters, so that's way above the 1345 average. Now, it had sort of low sort of brain case, long, low brain case. The width was low down, like in Homo erectus. It had a torus at the back here. Usually I have a torus. This one has a weak, and it had a weak torus here, but it had pronounced brow ridges. Okay. But it was said, I read an accompanying article by Anne Gibbons. She said its cranial features, it was too thin, or the bones were too thin or not thick enough for Homo erectus. And so that would include the thickness of these walt bones. But if you actually look at the measurements, and I compared them to some of the lower Homo erectus ones, they were still in Homo erectus range. So essentially, it was only the brain size that determined. She was saying it was the thickness of the architecture of the skull wasn't robust, or forget the exact word, but they were too thin or whatever, and the brain size. So it's only brain size that basically determined it wasn't a Homo erectus. And when it was originally found, it was considered Homo erectus, but it was not given that basically because of its large brain size. But that indicates that these robust skulls has nothing to do with cranial capacity. Okay. Because and the same case, Neandertals are very robust, large brain skulls as well. And there's other ones like recently, just a few weeks ago, or less than that, you probably all heard of the Denisovans.
Tell us who they are.
Yeah. So originally they were defined by DNA, ancient DNA from a little bit of finger bone. So no one knew what they looked like, and then they found little bits and pieces. Then they developed not from ancient DNA, but ancient protein analysis. They can analyze some proteins that seem to be unique to these humans, but before that they determined that these humans interbred with modern humans, like the Neanderthals, and they also interbred with Neanderthals. So if you're interbreeding by the biological species concept, you're fully human.
Because Neanderthals are fully human.
Yeah, and they interbred with Neanderthals, but also interbred with us anatomically modern humans. So you have to be a modern human. You have to be fully human to interbreed with humans by the biological species concept that is used. So they be human, fully human descendants of Adam and Eve. So, but once I started doing ancient protein analysis, they found that some of the jaws, massive jaws, were also Denisovans. But then a couple of weeks ago, it was published a paper, this skull called the Harbin cranium, also known as Dragon Man. It actually been found back in around the World War II days, and it was hidden by some Chinese guy. And before he died, he revealed the location. Oh, wow. So I think it was in 2018, It was given to some Chinese Academy of Sciences or something. And they analysed the skull, published on it, and it was the most massive skull, ancient human skull ever.
Oh, how big was it?
Well, cranial capacity wasn't the most. It was 14, 20 cubic centimetres, so a little bit above the average, but just the size of it. But massive brow ridges. But it had a sort of a wide face but short face. And again, the face, it jutted out a little bit here, but it was sort of more tucked in beneath the cranium here, not sort of protruding out. And so it was sort of more modern human-like face. And the back region here, back to, although it had a brain case that was more sort of ancient, like erectus-like, it was basically, the back was more rounded. This one isn't strongly angulated, but a lot of the erectus or heidelbergensis ones are strongly angulated at the back. And this one was not angulated at the back like that, certainly not strongly.
So what were they saying about this particular one?
Well, I guess they were trying to work out it's got modern features and ancient features. So to us, just a creationist, I believe that in the skull's recent ancestry, there had to be interbreeding between that and an anatomical modern human. That's produced the mosaic of features. Sometimes you get blended features as well. So that indicate that that was the product of a anatomically modern and an ancient human, and that gets back to the dispersion of Babel. You could have different waves of dispersion. Some people migrated early. Some people may have migrated later, established a base, and then later migrated. So you have these different waves of migration.
Okay.
And they may have, when they migrated, they took different sort of genetic information with them.
Of course,
and so it may not have been equally distributed. So then you get these characteristic form in different places.
Okay.
And then you have other effects, like that there may have been a lot of inbreeding, which means that sort of a lot of the genetic, the genes or information coding for some of the bony features, like say the brow ridges, you may have, for inbreeding, maybe become homozygous for those traits, meaning that the alleles, you had two copies on one of each chromosome for that gene, which means that they could have made them more pronounced.
Okay.
And so my belief is that, explaining why are they modern and ancient human, more robust humans, I believe that, it's just speculation, but, because we're not sure, but it may have something to do with the long lifespans that are described in the Bible for people who lived before the flood, but also for a period hundreds of years after the flood. There was a thing about that. And I can't imagine humans today living in this body for hundreds of years. And so in a way, maybe they were built stronger, which they are, more robust face, stronger face, cranial vault. Their skeleton was more robust, built stronger to last longer in a sense. It might have been a survival value for whatever environment they're in, but also to deal with long lifespans. I mean, the human body, we start to lose bone mass at around in our 40s, and you shrink as you shrink. You start to shrink as you get older, and things like that. But that's speculation. And so, but you may have had these genes or genetic information, longevity linked to robusticity, and then basically, but later after the flood, this linkage broke, and so you could have robust humans that didn't necessarily live longer, but they were more robust. But then some of these features have been lost as well, and the longevity genes or the genetic information is lost, or it's sort of or it's in there but it's not expressed anymore. It's all to do when one is the anatomical and modern forms expressed. I'm not sure, but I believe I don't believe in big coincidence. So I believe God must have put it in unless he tinkered it later on. It must have been in the genome of Noah and his family in the ark. But it may not have all been expressed. There may have been a lot of variations. So later it was expressed, and I guess the diversity would have started in Babel and then continued on. It's speculative, but it may explain a lot of what's happening. We know that Neandertals, they didn't live that long, but they were very robust. So this feature of the skeleton happened during development. It was not part of the aging process. It was during development that it developed these features, because a lot of the Neanderthals died sort of more brutal deaths through injury or things like that.
I was going to say, why do we think that they didn't live very long?
Because of all the injuries. Well, they examined the skeletons. They had a lot of injuries and stuff like that. Okay. So it wasn't sort of necessarily of old age. A lot of them died. It was through a lot of injuries and things like that. So that's possibly one reason of what happened. But the end thing is that it's still an area of active research, and so they were all. The important thing is they were all human, fully human descendants of
Homo erectus. We're talking about.
Yeah, Adam and Eve. Now the interesting thing is in Australia, I actually have one of the most robust skulls is actually in Australia called the Willandra Lakes Hominin 50 from the Willandra Lakes region. It was found near in I forget the lake's name. It was near Lake Mungo, and basically it had a big cranial capacity, I think 1540 cubic centimeters. So it's larger than the average human.
Is that the one they call Mungo Man?
I think that was another one, because I found really modern skulls there too.
Okay.
Actually dated older than this one. So at Lake Mungo, so that really modern skull, I think it was at Lake Mungo 3 or something like that.
Okay.
So you have both, and so you have probably different migrations coming in. But what the people who analysed, at first they tried to pass it off as pathological because it had about a cranial wall thickness of about 16 millimeters or something like that. So at the upper end of Homo erectus, and had receding forehead, it's really strong brow ridges and things like that. So, but everybody believed, and I believe it is a fully modern human, because in their theory, only modern humans could have reached Australia with boats. So they had to be intelligent people. And so basically, but the people who examined it later showed it wasn't pathological, but it shares features with Solomon Homo erectus from Java. And they believe some of its features maybe some other features come from elsewhere, but some of the features can only come from there. And so, but these Solomon erectus humans from Java are supposedly descended from other similar-looking Homo erectus, are much, much older, supposedly, and this line that led to it supposedly left Africa nearly 2 million years ago. So
how have we got these similarities if actually...
it can't have happened. It must have happened a lot more recently. And it only makes sense if they were both human, modern human, whatever, Homo sapiens. So you have the Solomon has to be Homo sapiens, and the evolutionists that study it admit that they have to be Homo sapiens, these ones. So the question then is, but then the ones that these Solomon, Nangdong Homo erectus descended from, the Sangerian or Trinal ones also had to be Homo sapiens, because you have this lineage. They had to be Homo sapiens if they're all human. And then what about all the other Homo erectus ones? So in the case of a human, and even the Damanese Homo erectus from Georgia in the Caucasus, which is, by the way, is an area which, if you look at the World Health Report on Goita, is the Caucasus and a lot of other regions like in Africa, even the cradle area bordering on the cradle humankind area in South Africa, a Goita region means people
What's a Goita again? Yeah,
where you get this. People might get this large swelling in the neck because they lack iodine in a diet, but it can be particularly bad if a woman is pregnant and doesn't have iodine and diet during pregnancy because the fetus or the baby developing doesn't get it, and it doesn't develop a normally functioning thyroid, and that leads to cretinism, which can lead to cretinism, which basically you don't have a properly functioning thyroid, so you don't produce thyroid hormone or enough of it.
And what does that look like?
Well, that means your metabolism would really slow down and at least a really stunted growth. The bones grow more slowly, some more than others. And as Charles Oxnard, an evolutionist, pointed out, some of the alleged primitive, he's an evolutionist, but I say alleged primitive features seen in some of these ancient fossils that I believe is part of human evolution can be mimicked in cretinism. but if you understand some of how the bone grows and how the keratin's affect it.
So they might be saying that this is a missing link or a part of evidence for evolution when actually it might be cretinism that has affected
it.
Yeah,
I believe you could have robust human with cretinism. Like I believe that could explain, say, the hobbit or Homo floresiensis.
The hobbit?
Yeah.
What's the hobbit?
That's the sort of the really small small size specimen found in the island of Flores in Indonesia. That was a big thing a few years ago.
They called it the hobbit.
Yeah, it has a brain size a little bit over 400 cubic centimeters. So
Okay.
I also believe that may explain funny things seen in the Homo lily specimen in South Africa. But it also may explain some of the features in the Debunks erectus ones, because they also had a very small brain size, not as small as a hobbit, but sort of around. So particularly skull 5 is really strange, and I think so. You could be looking at something because cretinous can reduce brain size by up to 50%.
Oh, that's a lot.
So if you had a small brain Homo erectus, robust human, you could actually explain a lot of it. Or even an average human, you could explain the Debunks erectus if it had cretinism and some of the other features. But what I was going to say is one of them had some clear pathology because it had all the tooth missing and alveolar reabsorption. The bones would be reabsorbed, both upper and lower jaws. So it indicated that it had been like this for quite a while, if months, if not years. And that indicates someone must have looked after it. Why? Because only humans would go out of the way to take care of someone like that because they can't chew. How would you eat if you had no teeth? And it would have probably not been that well
so it would have died. So it obviously had to have been looked after.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so and there was even a Homo erectus skeleton found in Africa that seemed to had really pathology. I think it was some sort of vitamin A. Maybe too much of vitamin A or something. But anyhow, it seemed to have had this pathology for a while, which means someone must have looked after it too. I forget the name of the skeleton. Was it KNM-ER 1808? I'm not 100% sure. So there are evidence that they looked after themselves. Even the Debunks ones, which may have been sort of pathological, they looked after them. They're infirm, and only humans do that. And there's a lot of interesting controversy in South Africa concerning Homo naledi. I won't really get into that, but because it seems that even though there's been a pushback, but there's been more studies recently that these small brain specimens actually buried their dead and used fire and things like that, and only humans do that, deliberately burial of the dead and using fire. So which is very interesting. But I believe some of the specimen were really pathological. So whether cretinous may explain that. There's evidence that from one of them. I talked before about Lucy's small centrum and the sacrum attached to the pelvis. Well, there's one there which had part of its the centrum too of this sacrum, and it was smaller than anything seen in the fossil record, which indicated you're dealing with an extreme dwarfism, and that's a feature of cretinism. Okay. So there's a lot of things there, but
okay. Well, Peter, you have shared with us a lot of information about these supposed missing links or ape-men, etc. If we were to bring it was that one. Let's bring that back in for our march of progress. Can you take us through, if you can, a summary of what you've shown us?
Yeah. Well, what I've kind of tried to show is, there's a lot of fossils, but the essential evolution scenario boils down to who were they, and who were they. If these were humans, then the larger specimen similar were also humans. We're talking about Homo heidelbergensis, broadly defined, the Neandertals, and like crania, like the Sujane crania of 1,800 cubic centimeters, they were all human too. It's just because they had thicker skulls, were strongly built, doesn't mean they're not human. That's an absurd idea. And so basically, and even even in modern humans, the cranial capacity can range from over 2,000 to under 700 cubic centimeters, and they're still normal. I'm not talking about pathological. I'm talking about normal intelligence.
Okay.
Pathological, then you get a lot further down, but I won't get into that. So we believe these were human. Their skeleton below the neck was essentially, even evolutionists admit, it was essentially modern-like, human-like. So that's the story, that these were human descendants out of Eve. These indicate these were just part of this group here. These are a lot of them have the brain size has been inflated, some wrongly reconstructed. Some of the I'm suspect about the motives of some of it, but anyhow, let's just say that their cranial capacity has been inflated to make them look larger than they really are. And even if they were the right size, you still have a gorilla. Now, I don't know how many cranial capacities of the gorillas have been measured. So certainly not all of them, but one at least gave the same cranial capacity. This one, even if you accepted it, it's the evolutionary view on it, or some evolutionary view on it. It's 750 cubic centimeters, and basically that gorilla I presume, wasn't speaking like a human, wasn't human-like. And the person I talked about earlier, Daniel Lyon, who had a cranial capacity under 700 cubic centimeters, he was normal intelligence, a human. He was an ape. And that's what I'm saying. I believe to be human, you need the brain organized like a human, but I think you also need a God-given human soul or mind. That I think explains what makes you human. And then you have, so if these go with these, and the Australopithecines were just a unique primate group. They were really apish, but I don't classify them as apes because they looked different from things like chimps.
Okay.
And evolutionist Charles Oxnard, who analysed them, he put them in a separate category altogether. And the only real argument is how much they walk upright. But so what? Even if they walk fully upright habitually, so what? What does the Bible say? It says nothing about primate locomotion. And God created primates with 2 feet, then I guess they were made to walk on them. So it's the obvious thing. And it created a lot of variability. There's a lot of variability today among primates how to walk. Gibbons are much more efficient than chimps at walking upright. They run upright, and they have a better posture designed for upright posture, although they use it mostly in the trees. But if they're forced on the ground, they run upright, and things like that.
And is there something to be said for, I suppose the creationists would also say, in our view, a common designer means they're going to have common features.
Of course. That's the thing. Why would, God created all these primates with 2 legs, and there's also, other creature birds have 2 legs. They're bipedal. Kangaroos are, and so there's I only touch the surface of a lot of things there, obviously, but
wow.
The thing is, there's nothing really to be it's to me it's a no-brainer. There's no evolutionary scenario doesn't work, and I haven't really, and this is just the skull. The real evidence against evolution is what's inside the skull. That's the brain. And you look at molecular biology, genetics, you look at the waiting time problem to get all this mutation fixated into the genome to make all these changes as supposedly turn this into that. That would not happen in, the lifetime of this universe or many universes, There's supposed to be the latest analysis is apparently we're about, if you include all the information in the DNA in the genome, we're 15% different from chimpanzees. They used to say 1 or 2%, but I think that just looking at the proteins, look at all of it. Now it's come out that we're about 15%. So even at 5%, that's 150 million DNA letter differences between us and chimpanzees, and supposedly of the common ancestor. Between us and chimps, it means the common ancestor. If each one in the alleged evolution evolved at the same rate, there would be 70. If there was 5% difference, there'd be 75 million differences in the DNA letters. Try getting that fixated into the genome in 6 million years. It's impossible. And even if they, and the thing is, when you get it fixated, it has to have some selective value, and that's the problem. And there's no way, you may, at most, you may get 1,000 mutations fixated in a genome. And by fixation, I mean that there's 2 copies of the mutation, one on each chromosome, in every member of the population. So I guess if it's a smaller population, it takes shorter time. If it's a bigger population, it will take longer. And so there's all sorts of things, but the calculation shows it takes a long time to fixate something and things like that. So, and for me, being a brain scientist, it's the complexity of the brain is just over. And I'm talking about functional complexity. The wiring inside there, you got about 86 billion neurons, about as many supporting cells. I just recently estimated there's over 3,000 different types of brain cells there. The brain has to control your autonomic nervous system. It has to control the hormonal system. It controls the somatic sensory system, the voluntary skeletal muscles. It does a lot of things, but you also have this issue, the ghost in the machine in the mind, that science can't really explain, that you don't know what is the link between the brain activity and thinking. So there's all these mysteries there, and there's even evidence from near-death experience that your mind survives death. So how does that, a non-physical mind surviving death, how does that evolve? Nothing makes sense if you look at it.
So when we're talking about the almost mathematical impossibility of mutations making these changes and eventually getting from even the type of brain that they would have to the type of brain that a modern human has.
Yeah. It wouldn't happen, and even just getting from the skeleton, the bones, it won't happen. But we're much more than just bones. The bones are the easy part. If
there was something you could use to finish us up today, Peter, what would you tell us?
Well, I think a statement by an evolutionist called James Shreve made a few years ago kind of sums up the area. He says everybody knows fossils are fickle. Bones will sing any song you want. And so that is kind of this thing. And so what I've just tried to show is that there's a totally different interpretation of his fossil, and your worldview lenses determines how you look at them. But if you really want the disproof of evolution, go inside the fossil's head and then look at the brain, look at the complex biochemical machinery inside there, where God's not just his fingerprints, but his hands are all over it. That's what I finish up saying.
Thank you, Peter, so much for your time today.
A pleasure.
We're also offering a free stream of the documentary Evolution's Achilles Heel. And there's a section in here on Neanderthals which touches a bit on what we were talking about today. The link will be in the description below.